So Matthew chapter 8, I want to read this. It's not a big chunk, but I want to read this little chunk all the way through, and then we'll go back. There's three different things I want us to see. A couple of circumstances, but three things that I want to call our attention to this morning. I'm going to have the scriptures here up on the screen, but I won't have the whole thing at once, okay? So we'll break it down piece by piece here in just a second. So what I'm saying is when we get to verse 5, you're going to need your own app. That's what I'm saying when we get there. When we came down from the mountain, large crowds followed him, and right away a man with leprosy came up and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Reaching out of his hand, Jesus touched him, saying, "I am willing, be made clean." And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. Then Jesus told him, "See that you don't tell anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer the gift that Moses commanded as a testimony to them." When he entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him, pleading with him, "Lord, my servant is lying at home, paralyzed, in terrible agony." He said to him, "Am I to come and heal him?" "Lord," the centurion replied, "I'm not worthy to have you come under my roof, but say the word, just say the word, and that my servant will be healed. For I too am a man under authority, having soldiers under my command. I say to this one, 'Go,' and he goes, to another, 'Come,' and he comes, and to my servant, 'Do this,' and he does it." Hearing this, Jesus was amazed and said to those following him, "Truly I tell you, I have not found anyone in Israel with so great a faith. I tell you that many will come from east and west to share the banquet with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the sons of the kingdom will be thrown into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." And then Jesus told the centurion, "Go, as you have believed, let it be done for you." And this servant was healed at that very moment. All right, like I said, there's a couple of circumstances here. And the first one I want to look at is this. It is this leper who cries out to Jesus that he could be healed if Jesus is willing. And if you know me well, I'm going to point out a couple of things about this, because you have to when you come here. I think it's what would have struck and probably did strike Jesus' mind. It almost feels, it's not in the text, okay? It's not in the text. It almost feels as if when he says, "If you're willing, you can heal me," you almost feel as if Jesus in his head and heart went, "If? What you mean, if?" He doesn't say it, so I don't know. But there is no if. In the text, you can see very clearly that there never was an if. I want you to think about that for a second, for yourself. How many times have you sat where the leper sat? Something you couldn't fix, something you couldn't heal, something you couldn't get past, a forgiveness that needed to happen, but you couldn't get over the hump to do it. Forgiveness you needed to seek, but you couldn't dare go and apologize. A relationship that's crushed that you're not sure he's willing to restore. How many times in your life have you sat there and thought there was an if with God? I'd go back to church if I thought he still loved me. I'd go and serve him if I thought he could actually use me. I'd just love to be free from this if I thought God could do it. How many ifs have you said? And I think every single one of those falls on God's ear the exact same way that it did when Jesus heard it from this man's lips. Again, it doesn't say it in the text, but you can feel the if. And what Jesus does say is incredible. So verse 3, there's more than one thing incredible about this, but reaching out his hand, Jesus touched him, saying, "I am willing, be made clean." The first amazing thing is this, that he touched him. And I think, we're far enough away that I can start to mention the C word and everybody's not going to fade off into some kind of thing, You're not going to get too upset. No PTSD, hopefully, this morning from that. But I think this means more to us now at this point. lessons that we learn and lessons that we experience, sometimes the hard way for some people. I know you huggy people got real burned by the whole COVID situation, right? And I'm not kidding. I know that is actually a fact, and it's real. Kids who weren't served well by distance and all of that kind of stuff. Isolation wasn't good, and we know that. We knew that before, we knew it during, we know it after, but it's now just a deepened lesson for us. Leprosy in the first century was COVID restrictions for life. Social distancing was so bad, you didn't just have a mask that said, hey, I don't know that I have things you want to be breathing. You had to cover your mouth yourself. You were your own mask. And from then on, you warned everybody who came within a distance of you to get back and to stay away. Now think about how hard that would be. That you don't hear it's going to be 6 weeks. You don't hear that it's going to be months. You don't live in California and hear it's going to be a couple of years. For the rest of your God-given life, you are sentenced to a purgatory of telling people first thing out of your mouth when you see them, unclean, the rest of your life. There's no cure for that. There's no cure for the emotional damage it does outside of Jesus either in that day, because you were going to be in it until you died. A lot of you are familiar. Those of you who grew up in VBS, you probably know what leprosy is, but not everybody it does. Of course, in Scripture, you're talking about a term that was used for several diseases, but mainly it is used for what we would still call leprosy, but we're more specific now with that term. But basically the problem is that it kills your ability to feel things. I mean, we think about the for lack of a better word, the very grotesque damage that it does. And what it looks like to have missing fingers because of infections and things like that, to where people start to lose things, quite literally lose their parts. I'm not going to sing the song this morning. I did think about it. It's playing in my head constantly, but I'll save you. If you don't know what that is, you come ask me later. I'll do a solo for you. But all those things are numbed, just numb to the point that you end up with all of these cuts and bruises and broken things that you don't realize you have because you can't feel. Those of you who struggle with severe diabetes and neuropathy know sort of what that's like. But imagine that it attacks every single part of your body, not just your extremities. Even your eyes are affected. And you might think, well, I don't need feeling in my eyes, do I? Well, go to a sandstorm in Odessa and ask the question. You need the natural defenses that only happen when your nerves are working and detect that stuff's flying into your eyes. You need them badly or things get damaged. You wouldn't have any of that over time as the damage spreads and gets worse and worse. And on top of that, as that damage spreads and gets worse and worse, and now you may look like an amputee, but that's not, something worse than that happened. Something worse than that happened. On top of all of that, you have the social stigma of having to warn everybody off. You had the isolation of your family members that you can never live in full communion with ever again. Just imagine what the man had been through, and you start to get a feel for how incredible the first part of Jesus' reaction really is. The first part of his reaction removed the if without words. It says he reached out his hand and touched him. Nobody would have done that. Nobody. Sometimes when you work, several of you here have experience in the medical field or even just in taking care of family and things like that. And some of you have had to touch things you never intended to touch. Pus comes from places pus should not come from. You know what I mean? It happens. And you have to deal with those things at times. And it may have scared you to death to deal with those things. And some of you do it as a job, which is amazing. Thank the Lord for you. I'm serious. I know that sounded a little sarcastic. It was not. It's amazing, and thank the Lord for you that you do those things. Okay? I've already told Tanya, when it comes to the day of gross things, for me, you go buy one of those toilets with a remote control so that you can do that from the outside, you know? They do make those, by the ways. By the ways? I don't know what that means. But by the way, I stayed in a hotel in Korea. That's as detailed as I'm getting, but it's a thing. And it's probably actually good in that circumstance. But here you are, and you do that every day, and we admire you for that service. When this guy got really, really bad, unless there was another leper well enough to help, nobody could do that for them even if they wanted to. Nobody was going to touch him. We don't know how long, but nobody was going to hug him. Nobody was going to shake his hand. Nobody was going to invite him to dinner. Nobody was going to dare go out to the leper's colony and leave him a meal. People were scared to death of him. And what does Jesus do? He reaches out his hand and he touches him. Without a word at that point, he could have already changed our world with that one message. He removes the if. He removes the stigma. All of the worst things emotionally, spiritually, that this man dealt with in his leprosy were gone before his leprosy was even healed, because somebody actually loved him enough to come up to him again, to embrace him again, to address him again, to hear him again. That's what Jesus gave him first. And that must have been the thing that shocked this man out of his gourd. Then he heals him. It says, reaching out his hand, Jesus touched him, saying, I am willing. The Greek word here is stronger than that. It's better than I am willing. It's not just, yeah, okay, I'll do that. It is, I want to. I desire to. I purpose myself to. And some translations word it a bit more strongly, even using these simple words. And they don't say, I am willing. They say, I will, which is the more literal translation. I will. But it's an I will, the word he uses, it's an I will with a want to behind it. Not like, hey, can you take out the trash? Yeah, I'll do that. How many of us said it like that this week? He's not taking out the trash. He's loving. And he's healing. And he's embracing. He says, I want to. I want to do that for you. And he heals him. Next thing he does is actually a little bit odd. The next thing he does is he tells him, listen, I don't want you going around telling anybody about that. And he says it with that kind of a tone. The words in the Greek that are used for his warning, I don't want you to go around talking about this, is actually, it's a strong, sometimes it has a connotation almost of rebuke. I don't think it's rebuke here. The man hasn't done anything wrong. But what it says is that Jesus is so strong in his emotion when he warns this man not to go tell anybody, that he wants the man to understand, listen, I'm not just being humble here. I'm not just not trying to draw attention. I do not want you to tell anybody about this. It's the kind of warning somebody gives whenever they've told you something that is really private and really confidential, and they say, listen, I don't need you going around and telling anybody about this. And they're serious, and you can tell it, and you know you're going to be thumped if you do. This is the kind of warning Jesus gives. People had been misunderstanding what Jesus was about, accusing him of doing some of these just for attention, of doing some of these things in the name of Satan rather than in the name of God. They've accused him of all kinds of false motives, and Jesus wants to help people, heal people, serve people, and bring people to faith, but he doesn't want to do it generating all of this negative publicity. So he tells him, listen, I want you to keep your mouth shut. And what does the guy do? He don't keep his mouth shut, does he? Whatever it was, he didn't know. And how would you? How would you? I mean, we might understand even Jesus' reasons behind not saying anything, but how would you in his circumstance keep quiet? I wonder sometimes how in the world, in our circumstance, having seen what God has done, having experienced the grace of God, and having known God's forgiveness, I don't know how we stay as quiet as we do either. It's like we read that verse and think that's the part we're supposed to apply to ourselves. No, our command is quite the opposite. Ours is, now you go tell. Go, share that. And so really, maybe he should have used reverse psychology on us too. And maybe that would have worked. I don't know. But that's what he tells them. And of course then, they never do. I don't think any of them ever stay quiet whenever that happens. Verse 10, though, we get to this next circumstance. I think, or verse 5. I'm jumping down. Verse 5. When he entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him, pleading with him, Lord, my servant is lying at home paralyzed in terrible agony. He said to him, am I to come and heal him? Lord, the centurion replied, I'm not worthy to have you come under my roof, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I too am a man under authority, having soldiers under my command. I say to this one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my servant, do this, and he does this. Hearing this, Jesus was amazed and said to those following him, truly I tell you, I have not found anyone in Israel with so great a faith. All right. You have here this man who is a centurion, and I was looking to see what military people thought might be the equivalent in our system and in our minds, what that would be. And there was actually a little bit of debate among the theologians and military folks, and theologians who were military folks. You got crossover there. And there was debate as to whether it would simply be an officer, or whether some would rank him as high as a major general, but you get the idea, right? You get the idea. He's a person with a lot of authority and a lot of power and a lot of responsibility, so much so that he would have been paid 15 times the average soldier's pay. 15 times. The more I was reading their discussion of what he would be, it reminded me, I don't know why, but every person it reminded me of was a colonel. I've known several colonels, and every one by personality, it reminded me of various colonels that I've known in my life. One of my favorite was a guy who lived next door to my grandparents, Colonel Hutchinson. And he just had a certain air, a certain attitude, a certain level of pride, and a certain authority about the way he said things and things like that. That just, was impressive. And he was a really neat guy, and I always liked spending time over. I would go to their house without my grandparents, just to go hang around with them and their big red they had one of those big red Dobermans, which scared my parents to death. They banned me from the neighbor's backyard several times. Don't go back there with that Doberman. But I still went back there. It was fine. He liked dog treats. What was I going to do? It was a cool dog. Besides that, I was a fan of Magnum P.I. How do you not like a Doberman? I still want one. Anyway, these colonels always have a certain worldliness about them because they've been stationed around the world usually, and they've seen a lot, done a lot, been responsible for a lot. And that's kind of the image. If you know those guys, then you kind of have that kind of an air. And I think that probably translates well to what this centurion would have been like. It does in other ways too, because some of the colonels I've known had very much the same attitude as this one. Men who could simultaneously be very proud of their career and their position and those things, and yet very caring and humble about both the men under their responsibility and neighbors in their community and things like that. I've seen some really servant-hearted, compassionate men who serve in those positions. And all of that kind of comes together for me. I was able to put a face and a name to this sort of a thing. This man comes to Jesus with that sort of responsibility, authority, and humility. And he asks Jesus for help, for somebody that a lot of people in power don't have the mind and heart to care about. One of his servants, one of his slaves. Now, he could have been one that himself was more like a Joseph to his Potiphar. That's entirely possible. That happened in Rome as well. He could have had that kind of responsibility. Doesn't matter. A lot of people still, with that kind of power in the Roman Empire, didn't care. This man did. And if we go over to Luke, we won't, but if you go over to Luke as part of your homework later, you can go over there and you get a few more details, one of which just fled my mind. I told you that was going to happen, didn't I? I just told you that. In Luke, he adds now I'm going to end up having to go over there. I was trying not to do it. No, we're going to skip it, but Luke says more. Go catch it. All right? When he goes, he doesn't go, but when he talks about this man, he talks about the authority that he has, and he doesn't say it to impress Jesus. Some people recite their resume because they would try to impress even God himself. He doesn't do that. He just says, I understand who you are. I'm a man who has authority. I know what authority looks like. And what does he say? You have more than I do. I believe you have the authority of life and death. I believe you have the authority of healing. I believe you have the authority of somebody who is the Messiah and the Son of God. That's what he's communicating when he says that. It's not a resume. He's not bragging. He's saying, I am under your authority. Not an easy thing for a man like that to be able to say unless he really means it. And he did. And now it came back. Over in Luke, there is a recommendation to Jesus from the Jews at the local synagogue, because this centurion is himself a Gentile, okay? That's what you would have had to have been to be a Roman centurion. And he is a Gentile. So he's not somebody that would normally hang around the synagogue. He's not somebody that would come looking for a Messiah, and he's not somebody who would come to Jesus for help. And yet, Jesus runs into more than one faith-holding centurion. And this is one of them. And the Jews who knew him said, listen, Jesus, he is worth it. He's worthy of your help and worthy of your attention because he's been good to God's people. He's been good to our synagogue, and we want you to do this for him. They plead on his behalf. So unlike the Syrophoenician woman who is asking for her daughter to be healed, and Jesus has the conversation there about, well, but you know I had to go to the Jews first. Jesus skips that whole conversation here because it's the Jews who are pleading. It's the Jews who are, we could use the word praying, that even though they didn't realize that's what they were doing before Jesus, and asking for his help. Their request is being answered as well. That would have been something highly unusual. The first man was untouchable. This man was unhealable. Yet Jesus did it all. According to your faith, it'll be done. Because you believe, I'm saying yes. And the man is healed. Interesting that contrast here. And Jesus hints at the contrast. He says that I haven't seen anybody even in Israel who had this much faith. He said that about several people. The Syrophoenician woman was another one. He says that because, one, it's true, and two, he wants the Jews to understand. Do you see this? He doesn't even know what you know. He doesn't have the story that you have. And yet, look at this. He could say the same thing now about someone out in the world who comes to him with more faith than somebody who grows up in church. You've been to church your whole life. I ain't seen this. That's what he's saying. And he draws that contrast on purpose because sometimes we become so familiar with the work of God that we're blind to the work of God. And we're blind to the ability of God to continue his work. Sometimes we think it's all just in written word and not still living and active. But it is still living and active because God is still living and active. Because the Spirit is still living and active. Because Christ is living and active. And because his word, the Hebrew writer says, is living and active. We read history, but we do not live what stays in history. We read a history that speaks power and healing to today. And so Jesus, who loved the unlovable and touched the untouchable and healed the unhealable, is the same Messiah today. And he wants us to see that. He also wants us to see something else. If you miss Wednesday night, you missed a lot. Really, really good. George Pendergrass and his wife Pamela were here, and they shared with us some of what God is doing in other places, and particularly among the Muslim world, both in the Middle East and in other places where Islam has spread and is sometimes even trying to make a resurgence, like in Southeast Asia. And so they were sharing with us, among several things, and I am going to include in Wednesday's email a link to a video that's on their website and on YouTube, so that you can catch that and see a little bit of what you might have missed. And if you were there, it's the video that we couldn't get to play. Who in the world knows why? We needed to pray and fast and sprinkle that TV the other day. But what is happening all over the world, and Curly's got a link I bet he would send you as well, is that God is doing an incredible work of reaching people that, for whatever reason, we're not reaching time in other ways. And so God is working beyond the ability of human beings to do their job. It is our job to spread the gospel, and I hope that because this is happening, that we don't get even lazier and laid back about it and procrastinate even more. Oh, God will take care of it. That's not what He wants from us. We need to be evangelists, every last one of us, truth tellers and truth spreaders. But there have been reports for years now, several years, of people from the Muslim world, whether it's, we heard this from EEM, talking about people into Greece as refugees. We've heard it from people going into Europe as refugees. They were talking about it in that article, about people in Iran who were coming to Christ, and George and Pamela shared about people in Egypt where they've heard those stories, where God is working around us human beings to bring people to Christ, creating a curiosity and creating a hunger in people to seek out the Word of God. Several years ago, in one of the EEM reports, one of the guys was talking about how there was a refugee, this was particularly in Greece, who, when he and his family showed up, they already were asking for a Bible. Why? Well, I had a dream about being in another place and being told about Jesus. Now he's in another place and he feels like maybe this is what it's all about. And so he's given a Bible and he comes to Christ. And they were talking about the same thing happening in Egypt. They were talking about, in that upper article, the same thing happening in Iran, a place where you and I actually would find it very life-threateningly dangerous. Some of us couldn't even be tourists very well, I think, but much less to be a missionary. God is doing the work, both through the Christians in the underground church there, and even creating hunger and thirst where there is no missionary to go and seek them out. Those stories keep happening because Jesus not only wants to reach people that maybe are our lepers, the people we don't want to touch, the people we don't want to go to, the people maybe we're less than willing, where if might actually be a legitimate question about whether or not we're going to be Jesus to them. God is working incredible things in the world around us. I hope that we don't, in hearing those stories though, think that God only does that in far away, far-flung, oppressed places. We should be praying that God does it right here in Early, in Brownwood, in Bangs, in San Saba. We should be praying for the people who might not walk into our door except for a nudge of the Holy Spirit. And He does that. In John 16, we read this in our Thursday study. In John 16, Jesus says, I'm going to send the Holy Spirit. And His job is going to be to convict people. I know we sometimes focus on the more sensational, or we focus on the touchy-feely. We focus on things that maybe the Spirit is not even sitting there going, I didn't even have that on my Post-it note this morning. The Spirit's job is conviction, first and foremost. Comfort, yes, but also conviction. He says it is His job to convict us regarding sin, righteousness, and the judgment to come. And when the Spirit convicts us of our sin, He does not intend for us to feel like that means that we now have to walk around saying, sinner, sinner, get back. No, He does that so that we will come forward. We will come to Him. that we will say on the road, Jesus, if you will, you can heal me. And he will look at us and say, I want to. I will. That's his job. We want to be part of that job. Ready and willing to follow up on what the Spirit is convicting. We want to be that person, like the one who met that refugee at the shore in Greece, who says, I can help you with that. I think your dream is real. I think your desire is real. And I know where to find that Jesus you're looking for. And we become the people who help bring them into Christ. That's God's desire. And he's working on people, and we don't even know who some of those people are. Again, he says, hearing this, Jesus was amazed and said to those following him, truly I tell you, I've not found anyone in Israel with so great a faith. I tell you that many will come from east and west to share the banquet with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. What is he saying? He's saying there are going to be people from all over the place. It's not just going to be you guys. Yes, you guys happen to like this centurion, but this centurion represents far more. I am going to bring all the Gentiles in. I'm going to throw open the gates, and they are going to flood into the kingdom from east and west and even north and south, even that. They're going to come from all around, and they're going to be at the banquet table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They're going to be part of the family, your family. There is no one we shouldn't be excited about bringing them up to the table and bringing them into the family. And he's just shown them. A leper, bring him in. Can you imagine what Simon would have thought if instead of the lady who comes in and washes Jesus' feet, a leper had come to dinner? Yikes. You'd have seen hand sanitizer flying all over the place like you've never seen before. He's welcome at the table. The Gentile is welcome at the table. The Iranian is welcome at the table. All of those people are welcome at the table. Every last one. No matter where from. That's God's vision. And that's who Jesus is. You might think at times some of those people, it would be impossible to bring them together. This is my favorite Rockwell, by the way. It's impossible to bring them together. Well, with man it might be. You've seen how those efforts go, right? Anybody think the UN is going to pull it off? I don't think so. They're like Congress with passports that don't work. But can Jesus? I tell you, they will come from east and west, from all over the place. And they will sit at the banquet table, and they will eat with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. An interesting list of guys, by the way. That's not just a family. It's not just a family tree. If grace wasn't in the Old Testament, there's not a one of them that would be welcome at that table either. But it's always been grace. It's always been the compassionate God who touches the untouchable, heals the unhealable, and builds a bridge nobody else could build through Jesus Christ. He had you on his heart and mind too. East side of the bayou or the west side of the bayou. He can bring them together. Isn't that something? He's already started doing it. You can see it. Go to Chick-fil-A. It happens. No, I'm kidding with you. Not today you won't. Go to Chick-fil-A today. It's all on me. Whatever you want. You better not have the door open when we leave here, or I'm in deep trouble. Deep trouble. Anyway, you can have whatever you want as long as there's water. But God can do that, can he? It's incredible. Here's a better question. God is going to do that, isn't he? We're going to get to see that, aren't we? We're going to get to be a part of that, aren't we? In Christ, our answer is yes. By faith, our answer is yes. Who did he say no to here in Matthew 8? Nobody. And he doesn't say no to you either.